just like how you orgasm, I think is like something you don't consciously think about when you masturbate. So I don't know. I'm a
Beautiful thing.
huge fan.
Welcome to the Phil with Forbes 30 podcast. This is Phil Michaels, Forbes 30 Under 30 entrepreneur and performance coach. Every year, Forbes names the top 30 entrepreneurs, leaders, and stars in the world. And each week, I bring you one of them to help you level up in your life and business. From celebrities like LeBron James to Kylie Jenner and Cardi B, to entrepreneurs with companies like DoorDash, Instagram, and YouTube, you're sure to learn from the list. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now it's time to level up. Level up.
Welcome to Phil with Forbes 30 podcast. Today we have a very special guest. She made the Forbes USA list in 2020, this year, for the consumer technology category. She's the co-founder of Lioness, the women-led sexual wellness startup that built the world's first and only smart vibrator that improves understanding of sexual pleasure and orgasms through biofeedback data. The Lioness vibrator is the only vibrator in the world that lets you see your orgasms so you can learn how to make them better and better. It uses precision sensors and an app to track your orgasms and see what factors make your orgasm better or worse: stress, alcohol, sleep, partners, and more. After all, as the old saying goes, never measured, never improved. They were recently featured as Best of CES 2020 and a finalist at Last Gadget Standing. And Anna, she was previously a mechanical engineer lead at Amazon, launching the Amazon Dash Buttons original concept. She's spoken at UC Berkeley, South by Southwest, and was named Paper Magazine's Asian Women Creators You Need to Know. She's a big advocate in Lioness's mission to expand understanding and research in sexual health and destigmatize female sexuality. She has a BS in mechanical engineering from UC Berkeley and currently resides in the Bay Area. Please welcome our very special guest, Anna.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Very excited to have you here, Anna. Welcome to the show. I'm honored, and I can't wait to share your story with our listeners. But before we dive into things, where were you when you found out you made the Forbes list?
You know, so I was actually in Vietnam. I was coming back from a short vacation trip, and we were on the plane. So I turned off on my phone for airplane service or airplane mode. And right before, I got a text from an old intern that I had, and she was like, "Oh, congrats on Forbes!" And I was like, what are you talking about? And so I was like switching out the SIM card really fast before the flight was leaving so that I could check. And that's how I found out. So the rest of the flight, I was just sitting there because I couldn't read or like I couldn't check anything. So I was just sitting on the whole flight, just being like, I wonder what's happening right now. And I was like, is it real? So it was definitely such a mind-blowing experience, because I think also for some reason I wasn't on the emailing list. So I didn't ever see the email come through that I was like selected. So I truly found out at the same time everybody else found out.
It seems like this is a common issue. I had the same thing. It was like my old professor had messaged me and said, go look on Facebook. And I was just, how did they find out before me?
Yeah, it was such a trip. And I was like, is this serious? And it was really
such a proud moment. Who was the first person you shared it with when you got the news?
I probably my brother was probably the first person I texted and was like, guess what happened? I told my mom, but she's Korean. She's very Korean. We moved over from Korea, so she doesn't 100% know what it was, but she was like excited. But I don't know if she actually knew what that meant or anything. But yeah.
Sure. In a previous podcast episode, we were joking around with, I wonder what our parents think we do, and if they could properly articulate it to someone they know about what we do and how accurate it would be.
Oh man, I have great stories of me telling my mom what I do for a living and how I make sex toys. So
yeah, actually that segues perfectly. So take us back to the very beginning, Anna, where you're from, where you grew up, and the path that led you to where you are now, ultimately making it to the Forbes list.
Definitely. So I was born in the U.S. in SoCal in towards LA. And we moved back to Korea when I was a baby. So I lived there till I was about 6 and then moved back to the US. And so I went to UC Berkeley. I always knew that I wanted to do something in engineering because I just wanted to build things. I thought it was like such an incredible superpower to be able to look at something, draw it out, and then being able to have it in your hands. And so I always thought I wanted to be in like a big corporate setting, you know, especially with, I think, cultural expectations of like, you have a good job, you stay at that job for many, many, many years, and like, and then you retire and you have a family and all of that. And so I did that for a couple years, and then I realized that there was something missing in terms of like what I was passionate about. And not that I was like, ever thought I was going to make sex toys for a living. I didn't grow up being like, oh, I want to, you know, build vibrators. I think it's like a really cool thing. So,
Yeah, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah,
that would be an atypical answer.
If anything, I was like, I tell this to people all the time because I think it's so relevant to so many women and people with vaginas stories. Like, I was actually extremely uncomfortable with my own body till I was like in my like early mid 20s. Like, I felt really ashamed, and I think in the past, like, I experienced sexual trauma as a child, and I think a lot of that made me feel like I didn't deserve like loving or like finding pleasure in my own body, because I felt like I had lost that part of myself. And so I actually was like very scared of like anything sexual or all of that, or just like exploring my own body. And it was actually, so I was at Amazon. I ended up at Amazon after I graduated. Loved the experience. I had an amazing team. And then one day I was like, you know, like, it'd be really cool to build something that I feel like I can help change. And so I actually ended up meeting a CEO of a different sex toy company at the time, that's no longer around. But I was like, to him, I was like, how do you know what you're building works for women and like people with vaginas? Like, how do you know that product is a good product? And he was like, oh, there's this industry standard where you put the vibration on your nose, and that's what a vagina feels, or a clitoris feels. And I remember just being like, what? Like, I cannot believe that's like something that people say in the industry. And if you
like,
go
this
to
is
like
the quality control metric we're using.
yeah,
This is the
or
barometer.
they say like the skin between your thumb and your pointer finger, like that's like a sensitive part of your skin. And so like that's kind of what it is. And I just realized that they're building such intimate products that are supposed to help women or like find enjoyment, but like clearly I don't know if they were building with something with like the right intentions. And so I actually at the time ended up meeting my two co-founders now, who were building this like AI vibrator at the time. And I was like, hey, like, I just want to help you do the mechanical engineering. Like, my background, my jam is doing manufacturing, understanding how to do that design, all the mechanical engineering around it. I'm not asking for anything. I'm going to keep my job at Amazon, but let me just help. I've love to help. And so that's how it all started. And clearly I did it for maybe too many months of trying to have both doing a startup and a full-time job. So I was like commuting from San Francisco down to Sunnyvale to go to Amazon. And then I would go from Sunnyvale to Berkeley to work on this startup. And then I would go from Berkeley back to San Francisco. Wow. And it was like 3 a.m. And I was doing that for so many months. One day I woke up and it was like noon. And so I was like completely late for work. And I was like, you know, like, I can't do this anymore. And so I kind of
came to this pivotal moment where you're like, I either need to stop one thing, give up one, put all my time into the other, because this is not working.
Definitely. Yeah, it was definitely, I think when you wake up at noon and you've slept through like 9 alarms, it definitely is an indication that your body is probably at its breaking point. So I just decided like, man, why not? Like, I want to give this a shot. I think like being a woman in engineering, especially, you know, the years back when I was starting out as my career in engineering, like, there's so much of a superpower that we don't realize. And being able to design and engineer something for people with vaginas, because you also have one, I think there's an amazing superpower to that. And there's such a lack of it, having females and women and just diversity in tech. And so I bit the bullet. I quit my job and I started Lioness with my two co-founders now, Liz and James. So it's been, let's see, I think I passed my 5 years a couple months ago. So now I'm kind of in year 6, which has been
Congratulations.
a trip.
And you were at Amazon, and while you're at Amazon, you were a part of the team that it came up with the original concept for the dash button, which is, if I remember correctly, this is where Amazon essentially created a button that you could put on your washer machine, for example. You hit the button and boom, Tide detergent shows up at your door.
Yeah, so I had it, I ended up in such an incredible team. It was called concept engineering. So we worked on projects that are supposed to be like 3 to 5 years out that didn't necessarily have to do with the current product line of like Kindles and the tablets and things like that. So it was really cool because we had very cross disciplines. We had, electrical engineers, software engineers, firmware, and we all had that in one team. And so we were constantly like building out products and prototypes. And so it was like, almost, I feel like it kind of built me for hardware startups, because I was like, oh, I know how to like think about things, work in a small team and get a product prototype out. And then also knowing how to do that for mass production. So it was, I am so grateful for my time there. I had amazing mentors and bosses and all of that really kind of helped me, I think, grow up in a lot of ways.
That's amazing. And, going back to your early childhood and the trauma, I've found just by doing this podcast, how many Forbes members have taken a trauma or an impactful moment, a pain in their early childhood that ultimately became their greatest gift, that ultimately became their business idea that they're now serving so many people in an impactful, positive way. And it's amazing.
Definitely.
I continue to see this commonality, this trend, this pattern amongst all of us.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been incredible, and it's been a healing ground for me too, because I didn't know. I think when I first started, I didn't talk about why it was so important to me to work on a product that wasn't just a sex toy, but had this like data integration to help women and people with vaginas learn about their bodies, like what's working, what's not, what makes you feel good, what doesn't, and just, learning to feel confident about your own body. Because I think the biggest question we have is, am I normal? Why does this happen? Is this normal that it happens? Why is this happening to me? And, most of the time it's 100% that you're normal. It's just that we don't get to have these conversations. And I think on top of that, there's so little research in female sexual function that we don't know. Like, we ask your OBGYN a lot of times, they're not sure either, because there's so little research. And one of the biggest research studies that people still use to this day on sexual function for women was a sample size of, I think, like 24 women, and it was back in the 1980s. So how can we base that on all like millions of women, So
antiquated.
Yeah, it's been
and
great.
You came in because you took a personal story, so you had the passion, you had the innate desire, and you also were able to use your hard, tangible skills. Like, wow, I found the intersection of my passion and my competency, and now I have a purpose that is more fitting for you with a deeper level of meaning.
Totally. I'm a huge fan of intersection, because, a lot of people are like, you should just be really, really good at one thing. But I think in this world, the more I'm learning, especially as a small startup, like, you just have to I think the best thing you can be skilled at is learning a bunch of different skills all the time.
You're a sponge. Just be an ongoing sponge. I love that. And how did you, when you had that conversation with your mom, I really need to hear this.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, how did that go? How did you explain this? I'm quitting Amazon, Mom, for something safer, more secure, more, sustainable for my job security.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very conservative Korean religious family. We lived in Korea for many years. My parents are your classic, immigrant Asian parents who just, who came here to help you find a better life than they had. And so I actually, when I first quit and I was working on Lioness, I didn't tell them for a couple months. I think I eventually was like, hey, I quit my job. I'm kind of working on this project, but I didn't ever go into detail. And then I think there was a day when she was like worried, because I was just like never responding to my phone calls, because I was just working on this startup nonstop. And she was like, I'm going to come visit. Like, I want to just see that you're okay. And so she flew up, and I kind of was like, okay, like, this is my time. I'm going to have to tell her. So I took her to our office back then, which was at Skydeck. So it was like a communal space. We had like 4 desks pushed together. And I was just showing her what I was building. And I was like, this is a vibrator. Like, this is really important to me. And I told her a little bit about, she knew that I had sexual trauma in my childhood, but it was, again, one of those things where we never talked about it because it was kind of swept under a rug. And like, like I went through like severe anxiety, depression, and all that. But, especially in our culture, we don't really talk about those things very often. And so it was a moment where I got to be like, back then all this happened, and to me it's important now that I can do something that's so like the exact opposite of hiding and like feeling ashamed. And so I kind of was showing her all the products, and she was really quiet when I was showing her. And then she was eventually like, when I was younger, I had a vibrator. And I was like, oh, okay. And then she just started talking about her sex life and things that have happened in her past, and all of these like beautifully gross stories. And it is just one of the most beautiful, disgusting things I've ever experienced. Is we got to have this like full-on sex talk together. In one thing, it's like, it's gross because you don't want to hear that from your parents, but at the same time, I couldn't believe that was the reaction she had. And at the end, she was like, I always wondered if you were okay from all of that happening to you and like going through depression all the time. And like, she was like, it's nice to know that like you're okay. And I was like, I'm really okay. Like, I feel like I'm in a good place. And so it was actually turned out to be such a great way to, create that full circle. And when we did our first production run, and I was in China and I got those samples, I like packed them into my luggage bag and I brought one to her, and I was like, I want you to have this. I was like, I don't care if you use it or don't use it, like you should keep it because I worked really hard on it. So it turned out better than expected. And now my entire family knows, my dad knows, my grandma knows, everybody
Good
knows.
for you. That must have been such a liberating moment. Like, I mean, you finally open up that door. It became almost like it opens up the door to all other conversations that might be difficult to have.
Definitely. And, it definitely, in retrospect, I can say like it was such an amazing moment. I think at the moment when she was like telling me about, like which sex toy she had and stuff, it was just like you freeze and you're like, oh my God, that's like too much information. But I think that's one of the greatest things about starting this company is people just being so open to us and, telling us, sharing their stories with us so willingly. I think it's been like such like, I appreciate it so much because I know how hard of a conversation it is to talk about things like that.
What advice would you give someone who is maybe dealing with a difficult discussion like this and they want to share or reveal something with someone close to them? What would you tell them to do?
Honestly, and like my therapist tells me this, reminds me this all the time, is, if the people that you want to talk to you about, certain things truly love and value you, at the end of the day, all they want to see is that, the best for you and that you're happy. And so I think it's amazing to know that that's like your safe way to being able to express yourself. I think a lot of us go into kind of a fight or flight or freeze moment where we're like thinking about the worst case scenarios, like what if they reject me and they hate me and all of that. And I think, everyone's family and, loved ones are different, and there's definitely difficult conversations that we don't know how to have. But I think it's just always finding the cheerleaders in your families. For me, when I first quit, I told my brother, because he is like my best friend in the world. And I knew that he could support me and like he would back me up if, my mom were to be very upset or whatever, if this conversation went very differently. So I think it's like finding the advocates in your life that's going to like help you. And also, I always say this really practical advice, especially for people who are like, oh, I have an Asian mom, like she's going to kill me. And I'm always like, the practical advice is that you just have to kind of like shock them every few years, and then you increase the shockingness and shock factor. For me, I was like, I got a tattoo when I was 18, and then she like hysterically cried And then I colored my hair like pinks and purples and blues, and she was just like, what a weirdo. And then I shaved my head completely a few years ago, and she just like did not even flinch. And so I think it's like building up that kind of like, hey,
Gradually
I'm
just,
okay. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just trying different things, and I think they're more willingly accept, like they love you at the end of the day. So I think they just
yeah.
want you to be happy.
Yeah, ultimately, they're just looking out for your safety. They love you. They're worried about you. How's this going to affect? Does she have job security long term? They care about you. They love you. They want the best for
For
you. And
sure.
sometimes the expectations they have for you are not the expectations you have for yourself. And there's a little bit of those growing pains when you don't meet their expectations, or you exceed their expectations, or they're just
Yes.
simply different.
Yes. And it's, that's like a really important thing, is that it's not about you. If they're mad, it's not they're mad at you or they don't like you as a person. It's that expectations weren't met that they had. And so it's like understanding that separation, I think, is important.
Yeah, one of the things that Tony Robbins did when he was studying, he was asked to go and speak to the military. And the military had like a special forces operation training going on. And he was asked to go speak to them. He speaks with them. And then the general like pulled him aside and said, what is it do you think about these soldiers where they have very high standards for themselves, very high expectation for themselves. They wake up at like 3 a.m. They're running 10 miles, whatever it may be, right? And then they go back to civilian life. And when they transition back to civilian life, eventually they gradually start lowering their expectations and standards for themselves. And he said that you will succumb to peer pressure very easily. It's human nature. So you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if the 5 people you spend the most time with are, let's say, your significant other or your family members or your friends that have been living the civilian life, they don't have the same standards or expectations that you have. So what happens is it's not that, let's say you wake up at 3 a.m. and you're going to go on this 10-mile run again, because that's what you're conditioned to do. And your significant other goes, oh, come on, just relax once in a while. You don't have to do that. And it's not because they're trying to hold you back or that they don't love you. It's because they do love you, and they just want you to be okay, and they want you to be safe and happy. And their definition of how they define and envision happiness or safety or love is different than maybe how you envision it. And I think it's an important value to recognize, like, people have different expectations, and maybe guiding them through those boundaries of, yes, you understand them, you empathize with them, you understand their frame of mind that they're coming with, their perspective, but then also sharing, hey, this is what I want to do. This is my passion. This is my interest. This is what my purpose is.
Yeah, that's incredibly well put. I would love to get that translated in every Asian language possible so I can share it to like all our parents. I love that.
There you go. And then, speaking about this taboo topic, it reminds me of John Lennon's quote where he talks about, we're able to kill people in broad daylight, but then when it comes to making love, we feel like we need to hide. And it seems like sex and physical love, affection, has still been a taboo topic recently. Can you share more
Oh
about how we
man.
overcome that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So we're in the Bay Area, so we're, in Silicon Valley of startups, and it's kind of where people, things happen and where you make dreams come true. When we first started this company, we knew that it was going to be hard. We knew that it was a taboo topic, but I think we were like, oh, but we're in the Bay Area. Like, this is a perfect place to do it. And I think in general, what we've learned over the time is like, I think the US in general is, far more conservatives, especially, with a lot of things, and especially coming to sex and like female pleasure is like a very taboo topic that I think we still have very outdated rules and ways that we can talk about it, or like it has to, especially like in the startup world. I think if for investors, they're always like, oh, we're into, doing health things and biofeedback. But then when it's sexual pleasure, a lot of times we've gotten like, I don't see why that's important. And then, and like it has to, they're like, why don't you guys do something that has to do with fertility or menopause or all of that. Like, it has to have a very like health function to it. But the important thing is that, you know, sexual wellness is a part of your sexual, or just wellness in general. But it's like a hard sell, because I think it's like enjoyable and things aren't supposed to be enjoyable. And as much as like fertility and all of that is super important, I think when we talk about like, oh, we're doing a lot of investment in femtech or sex tech, it's always focused on fertility, especially. So it's definitely been an obstacle to be like, to go into an investor's office and being like, oh, here's a vibrator that we built. Like, we did it with a team of 5. You know, we got all the engineering down, all the manufacturing, we've got it. Like, we can get these out the next day. And for a consumer hardware product, like, people know that's like an almost impossible task. And we did it. But then people, like the investors, you know, tends to be all male, and they look at it and they're like, oh, I don't need to touch it. And I was like, no one's used it. Like, you know, pick it up, like, see how it's like a fully finished product. And then they like will bring in their executive assistants, who tends to be a woman, and being like, okay, what do you think about this product? And, you know, what is she supposed to say of like, oh, I love these, I have like 10 of the, you know, like, and so she's like, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure. And I don't blame that person, because she doesn't want to be categorized as the person that you go to for everything womanly or whatever. And so,
and it's like uncomfortable, I'm sure, for her talking to her boss about this in a formal environment, in a business setting. It's like, how do we break down those barriers and also allow everyone to be comfortable talking about this? How have you overcome this obstacle?
You know, I think when we first started, there were definitely times we took it pretty hard. Like, we took it personally, of being like, what the heck? Like, that meeting was so horrible. Like, and we did a lot to be like, okay, well, maybe we should dress more professional, or like, maybe we shouldn't say the word like clitoris or masturbation and all of that. I think over the years, it's almost like it's, I think, a part of just growing up, and you're like, I just don't give a shit what other people think. Like, I don't want investments from people that think that way, or can't expand beyond like being like, oh, it's a sex toy. Like, we're doing so much work to expand into research and medical academic researchers. Like, we're opening these doors for using this data to be one of the largest studies in the world that has about female sexual function. And so we are very confident in what we're building, and we're sure that this is an important thing. And so and the numbers also don't lie. Like, how many people purchase sex toys and are in, you know, in this industry, I think is a clear indicator. So to me, is like, anyone that has a bias just because it's quote unquote icky or whatever, like, you just kind of, I don't know, sometimes it's kind of fun now, because I like purposely look them in the eyes and say just very intense, like, masturbation, clitoris, like vagina, like
just shock
toys.
value.
Yeah.
Just break their pattern, get them out of their comfort zone. And it's like, okay, now that you're over that, we can move forward to the business, because here's the numbers, and we're taking a scientific approach to sexual health. And if you want to be on the bus, we're happy to have you on the bus. But if you don't want it, then we're on to the next one.
Exactly. And, you know, I always say, like, you know, men can use this too. We've had a bunch of men use it, anally, because the muscles there are your pelvic floor muscles. They all function very similarly, and you get the similar biofeedback data. And so I love saying those kinds of things, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of big businesses, because we can't, even though we're a sexual health company, because at the end of the day, they see us as we're categorized under pornographic material. So we can't do the traditional Facebook ads or Google ads or all of that. So we can't have ads on different like traditional paths. And I think when we try to get covered by like bigger social, like media networks, there are a lot of times they're like, we can't have this, like, this is way too sexual. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I think everyone always says they support, you know, women founders and femtech and sex tech, but I think, you know, words are cheap at the end of the day. So I think
you need to take
there's
action. Let me
be the gateway
to this. Just like you had the initial conversation with your mom and opened up the door, you know, hopefully this will open up the door to allowing you and your team and enabling this conversation to happen, because it needs to happen. It was just like the stigma with mental health. for a long time, it was like, oh, you go to a shrink, like you're
Yes.
crazy. You were labeled as crazy. It was actually like a diagnosis for,
Yes.
and now we're realizing like, oh, wait, therapy is important. Your mental health is important. And for a long time, that wasn't the case. I mean, even I'm a coach, and coaching for a long time was like stigmatized. And now we're starting to realize like, oh, everyone could use a coach. It's not just certain people. And one of the sayings I always use is every athlete doesn't have a coach, but every Olympian does. And so I think it sounds like we're starting to shift the paradigm for sexual health as well. That this is for everyone, and it's normal, and we need to normalize it. And it reminds me, you and I were just talking about this before the interview started, but one of my favorite speeches of the past 10 years is Emma Watson's He for She campaign with United Nations. Amazing, eloquent speech if you haven't watched already, but she talks about this he for she, where we empower men to empower women rather than trying to be him versus her. Let's let him empower her, and through that he can enhance his masculine energy, for example, instead of feel emasculated. And how can we make that conversation happen more often and more transparently? And it led me to dive into Emma Watson a little deeper with the work she's doing. And one of the things, I forget the name, but you and I were just talking about this, how she created this platform, or somehow involved, where women can openly teach and talk about masturbation, female masturbation specifically. And they have video content, but it's done in a very, I don't want to say formal, but in a digestible way that's meant for educational purposes, not just, pornographic material, which it seems a little outlandish to even call it that. It's for someone's health. And
Yes.
this was in, I think, Europe, I think specifically France. I could be wrong by that, but it seems like the US is a little antiquated in that approach. Tell me if I'm wrong, but is there anything we're doing on the US's behalf to also educate people and open up that conversation? And maybe it's you,
Yeah.
if not.
Yeah, so I think there's quite a bit. We've seen we felt a little bit lonely, I think, when we first started. Being female founders is surprisingly, uncommon. And then doing things for femtech and sex tech is also very uncommon. And so I think one of the actually interesting things is that traditionally the sex toy industry is male dominated. Almost all big industries that are making those, like pumping out all those like sex toys, vibrators, tend to be all male led companies. And I think over the years we're starting to see that completely shift. And I think especially this new generation is really taking that into control of like, this is not how this industry should be done. And so we're seeing so many amazing femtech and sex tech companies come out, and they do have a lot to do with education or having safe spaces to have conversations. And so I think that's been really amazing to see, of like just seeing all these, like Cindy Gallup of Make Love Not Porn. She's an advocate for, making videos that don't have like the traditional pornographic kind of feeling, and it's just real people making love. And there's companies like Taboo, which is like a platform where there's a bunch of education and easy articles for you to read to just educate yourself in terms of anything pleasure driven and all of that. So I think we're seeing so many amazing companies come up, and it's all because we all grew up not being able to find those spaces. So there's definitely a big shift. I will say like a big win is at CES, which is Consumer Electronics Show, one of the biggest electronic shows in the world. For all these years, sex toys were banned from coming, no matter how innovative or whatever. It was considered like they were just not allowed to have sex toys. But then we realized this weird thing of like, but then there's like people that are booth babes that are allowed to come, or they have like very suggestive photos. Like, I don't understand like what the reason, or they've had like VR porn companies come, because that was like a technology. And so like all the companies in the sex tech industry came together and were like, this is not okay. Like, we need to see, either you ban it for everybody or you let us come. And so 2020 was the first year they had a trial run. So a bunch of us came as sex tech companies. We weren't put in a corner. We were all in the the Sands Hall, just like front and center, had all our banners and things like that. And it was actually such an amazing success for CES because they got so much press coverage around it.
Yeah, I'm getting the
You know,
chills. Like you're
yeah.
making history right now. You get to say this is the first ever and you won best of show. I mean, that's absolutely
Yes,
incredible.
yeah. So to not just be
Congratulations.
there, but to thrive and win these awards and get this
Good
press
for you.
coverage, CES is going to continue doing it for, it's no longer a trial, and they're looking into bringing sex tech companies into main hall. So it's really amazing just to see that. Like, I think all of us are companies, sure, but at the end of the day, we all band together as sex tech companies to be like, we need to change this conversation for sure.
Yeah, it seems like it wasn't necessarily a sex thing. It seemed like it was more of just a male dominant thing. Like, oh, we can have the babes over here for the men and we can have the VR porn for the men. But then when it came to the female
Yeah.
sex related stuff, like, oh no, sorry, that's too much.
Exactly. It's so interesting, and we had our own set of rules too of like you can't have any photos of like people using, I don't know. They had like really weird, I think they were ones to just make sure that we weren't putting like pornographic material on our banners and things like that, but it's like we're a sexual wellness company. We're building this like vibrator, there's no phallicness, there's no veins, like it's a tech product. Like we haven't seen this kind of tech innovation in sex toys, ever. So like, why wouldn't you have us at CES? Is that kind of our argument?
Good for you. And, thinking of those companies that you mentioned, one of the ones that, it seems like when you purchase sex toys, for example, everybody goes to that typical local rundown sex toy shop that's like, no, everyone's driven past it a couple times and they just, it looks run down and dingy, like a dive bar for sex toys. It's like
Yeah,
no
yeah,
one wants to go in there. No one wants to be seen in there for the most part.
for
And
sure.
so, and you usually get like cheap quality things that are just, they're more like a novelty item rather than something that can actually work with a high quality brand. One of the brands I found to be the most high quality and legitimate is
Hmm.
liberator.com.
Hmm.
I'm, by the way, disclaimer, I do not work with them. I don't get a compensation for this at all. I'm recommending it because they actually have quality products. And speaking of products, I saw that you showed yours on camera. So I would love to dive in now into the
Yeah.
technology. And can you show us how it works and explain a little bit more? Because I'm sure the listeners are like, okay, Phil, shut up. I want to see this thing in action.
Yes,
Please.
so happy to do it. So yeah, so this is the Lioness vibrator. This is what we launched with 2 years ago. We took about 3 years to develop. So it looks like a normal rabbit style vibrator. For anyone that can actually see the video, it looks like a normal rabbit style vibrator, but actually what's interesting is there's actually two force sensors embedded onto the shaft of the vibrator. So what we're measuring is pelvic floor movements, how the vagina or anal muscles or any pelvic floor muscle is squeezing and relaxing. It's one of the best indicators for arousal and orgasm. So you use it like a completely normal vibrator, but when you're done, you actually get to pair it to your phone and you get to see the data. And just like a Fitbit, you can see actually how it changes over time. Like, for example, for me, a cup of coffee versus no cup of coffee is a really different orgasm. And people have experimented with lack of sleep, stress, different medication. So it really becomes a way to self-experiment and feel confident about what's working and what's not. So orgasms are actually really interesting. It tends to look like a rhythmic pelvic floor movement. So your vagina is squeezing and relaxing at a really rhythmic movement is usually what the orgasm looks like. But actually what we found, and there's the study that I mentioned a little bit back, that was done back in the 1980s, is that they actually found different patterns of orgasms. And so like the way you orgasm can be very different. So the rhythmic up and down with like similar force of relaxation and pressure is what we call the ocean wave type. It's kind of what we found the most common. And then there's your avalanche where you start really high and then you kind of rhythmically come down. And then your kind of classic, what they show in movies is like, there's people that are what we call volcanoes, which is like a huge explosion of force at the top and then like a slow trickle down. So we found that really important as one of the stepping stone to figure out what orgasms there are. And I think a big thing is like people asking like, am I normal? because you might ask your friend, like, talk about an orgasm, and then you're like, mine doesn't feel like that. And then you're like, am I having an orgasm? Like, am I doing it wrong? And it's mostly probably because you guys are different patterns of how you orgasm. So
it's not that you're trying to achieve one of those patterns that you just
no,
mentioned. It's more like a fingerprint. Like everyone has
yes.
their unique pattern.
Yeah, so we haven't seen in the thousands and thousands of sessions that we've had, and they're all anonymized. We don't get to see like where they're from, who they're from. We're looking at aggregate data, so those we haven't seen anyone jump from one to a different one. We've seen people. If you're an ocean wave, I'm an ocean wave. You tend to always be an ocean wave, but the way you have an orgasm, if you've had like we've done things with like THC lubricant and like CBD lubricant, and seeing the huge difference in how you orgasm has been really fascinating.
So it's like you have the wave, but maybe you now learn how to amplify that wave.
Yes.
Got it. So it's just essentially magnifying what you already have so you can get the maximum experience of your fingerprint, for example.
Exactly. So I can show you what the actual data looks like.
Oh, yeah.
If my screen will show it.
And I would love to hear what's been the most surprising statistics that you've learned from all of these. I know you keep their data private, which is phenomenal, but then you get to learn insights about the data after you see trends and patterns of an X amount of sample size. I would love to learn what is the most surprising statistics or most common statistics you found that have been most insightful for you.
I think the most interesting thing I've learned is I actually had a male friend, I gave him a Lioness, and I was like, hey, can you try, and like, would you be willing to share your data with me? And then I took a look, and I thought the most interesting thing was that we have really similar orgasm patterns. So I think the way male, men or male, the orgasm, the way your pelvic floor muscles move is really similar to how females or people with vaginas also move. And so we're just like, I thought it was an amazing thing of like, oh, we're like orgasm twins, but I think it has a bigger thing of like, all of us have really similar movements when we orgasm. And I think the great thing is right now, because of the stigma, a lot of the sex research, especially at universities, are constantly defunded. And they don't get enough, funding to be able to do research studies. So the hope is that these are kind of like fun stories of how we find little interesting things, but we're starting to partner with actually like academic researchers and medical researchers now to actually give our users the opportunity to opt into their studies. And that's the only time we share data with somebody, and they're able to actually reveal more interesting things, because I think there's so little we know, and these sample sizes being so small, I think it's going to be really amazing to be able to see people with vaginas of all walks of life, different race, different areas, different like ages, all of that, being able to see what similarities we have, what differences we have. I think it's going to be really eye-opening. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and Johns Hopkins seems to be always pioneering a new frontier. For example, they're the first academic institution that's really largely studying psychedelics on a large scale at their psychedelic institute. And it seems like they would be, interested in getting involved in something like this, because they have taken on taboo topics previously. But I also think about early childhood education. I mean, I was lucky enough to go to a blue ribbon high school where, I think even in elementary school, we were learning about sex education with an actual class. Within physical education, we had sexual education. How have you seen that? I'm not sure if it's different in California. This was in New Jersey where I grew up. But I'm wondering if there's something that can happen early enough to change this paradigm and start introducing it as normal behavior, because kids nowadays, I'm assuming, if they have access to a mobile phone, they have access to a lot of hyperbolic pornography, which is not always the best, and correct me if I'm wrong, for educating children on sexual activity and healthy sex lives.
Definitely. I think I definitely think there's a lot of education that needs to happen, early, and it ranges from like what you learn. It doesn't have to be like all sex involved, but just knowing your body parts, like understanding the terminology for the the proper terminology for the different body parts you have, what's different between, male and female. I think those are really important conversations to have. It definitely doesn't happen enough. I don't know if schools now are changed, but I can't imagine that they've changed as much. I've also was just very lucky to have an amazing sex ed teacher in high school who made us, stand up and say the words penis and vagina 3 times without laughing, and just like it's showing us how to put condoms on and all of that. I think was such an amazing experience that not everyone gets to have.
Yeah, it's amazing. They made it fun. It was like edutainment rather than just education.
Although I don't know at the time I think all of us were just horrified, but it's like I look back on it and it's like, that's so awesome and she had like a little question box you can anonymously put questions in, and she'll help answer those questions. And I think that was such an amazing advocate for young people that are super impressionable. So I think a lot of the interviews we always have with understanding users, I think a lot of us say like we've learned sex through porn. Like you watch porn and it makes you feel very not normal a lot of times, and feeling like, why am I like this? Like, why does this happen? And I think for a lot of women too, we hear that you learn through your partner. Like, usually the partner's more, has had sex before, or like if you're a virgin at the time, like you learn through somebody else's eyes of, how sex is supposed to be, what you're supposed to like, what you're not supposed to like. And we don't really give ourselves the opportunity to self-explore. So I think I'm a huge advocate of learn safe ways to masturbate, learn safe ways to, understand consent, I think is very important. And just like understanding your body parts and why you have certain things, what a clitoris looks like, I think is a big one. It's amazing how much we know so little about the clitoris, or like understand that, it's like this big thing that goes like inside your body and out, and it kind of looks like what would you call it? Like a butterfly almost. And so like, we don't really learn any of that. So, and these are things that I started learning as, like in our company, and like being able to be around this, amazing resources. Mm-hmm. So I think there's definitely a lot to be done in terms of education, but I definitely think there's steps being done, even if it's not in school, like with social media. I think, there's bad sides to it, but there's also amazing sides of being advocates for amazing sex educators that are out there that are willing to talk about these conversations. And I think that's been really great to see. I think that's like the amazing thing is like, a lot of times people take it into their own hands to fix a broken system.
Yeah, maybe it's during that sex ed, maybe they all get access to a masturbation tool or technique to help them learn about their bodies, and anatomy and physiology is so important. Do you have a community where your users can all aggregate and talk, like a Facebook group? Or
yeah, so we worked on it for a little bit. Building communities is really, I think as a startup, like building communities is really hard because it has to be very self-motivated and also just like very open. So right now what we're focusing on is like, you explore yourself. Like we're, learn about yourself and understand what works for you, what doesn't, feel more confident about your own body. The hope is that we do kind of open up communities where people can share things, especially people that can be related to. So people that are post-pregnancy or post-menopause, like having those communities to really understand the different nuances of like, growing up with time, or, your body's changing over time. And so the hope is to continue to do that. Right now, like our biggest way is that we have a newsletter. And when people actually email us, we're a small company, we're a team of 5. So, when people email us, it's like 95% of the time one of the co-founders reading it, and a lot of times like we'll all take the time to respond. And like, we're so grateful. Like we wouldn't be here as a startup without the people that believed in us as a small company. So we like take the time to respond, and people send us, really amazing stories that they love to share with us. And we love to just hear all of those. And like, yeah.
It's awesome. There's an amazing app for relationships. I also don't receive compensation for this. It's called Relish. And It's all about relationship health. And so my partner and I, we have access to it, and it gives you fun activities to do every day throughout the week to just re-engage and see if you're having an issue, and there's a community on it so you can pose questions, and it's amazing. And I could really see this in a similar fashion for your company, since you already have the app and whatnot. And I know you're going to show us the data too. I
Yes.
don't want you to think I forgot about that, but I think it's something to look into for you and your team called Relish.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into it. That's really awesome. And we like the biggest thing is like, experiment with different things. So it's great for, things like Relish to give you that opportunity to kind of explore. Because sometimes it's hard to come up with your own things, what you want to try and not try.
There you go.
So I'll show you kind of like, this is the list view. So you'll see all the different sessions on here. So I'll click into one. So what you're seeing is this is the whole session. So how this person used it vaginally. So how it squeezes and relaxes over time. And then I can actually zoom in right there. That's the orgasm right there. So you can see that really rhythmic movement.
Yes, the frequency is increasing, right? And the wavelength too. So what we're looking at, for those listening that aren't watching, by the way, you should watch this. It's on YouTube, so you can watch it. But we're looking at the waves of the orgasm during the time that they were using the vibrator.
Yes, and then I will show you. So I think that actually, so that's on our demo account, but I'm almost positive that's actually my data. Actually, so my co-founder Liz, she has a really similar orgasm pattern as I do. So sometimes we get her like confused if it's just like anonymized for like, I think that's mine, or like, I'm not sure, that might be yours. But I can show you. So that's like what I would consider kind of a typical one. And then you can see kind of a different one. So this is when we started experimenting with THC lube when it first came out, like seeing, is there really effective? Is there a difference? So you can actually see the entire session is just incredibly lots of up and downs, lots of movements, lots of sensation. And
a lot of volatility in the wavelengths and the frequency.
And then the orgasm is right here. So that in itself it almost doesn't look like that typical rhythmic. It's like a lot of different movements and up and downs. And so it's, the more you just experiment, you're kind of starting to, it's almost like a Rorschach test of like, you're starting to see all these like really big differences in like what's working for you and what's not, and things you might not even expect that might be changing just your pleasure in general.
And you might have thought that was an unremarkable wave, but actually no, that meant something, because as you have X amount of data, I know central limit theorem says about a sample size of 30 or more before you can prove statistical significance. But if you have that size of a sample, then you're starting to identify smaller, more granular changes in your wavelengths. You're like, oh, that worked. I'm going to do that one again.
Yeah, I always love telling people like coffee is like really good for me. It does change it quite a bit, but then wine is like really bad. Like to me, is like really flatlines the whole experience. And people are like, oh, really? I would think otherwise. And so, but it's like for me, I've learned like, oh, like it's just not great for me. So,
you might be on a really date and you just take a cup of coffee instead of no wine for me. I'm going to have coffee.
Exactly. So I think it's really empowering to be able to like know these little things about your own body. It's just like being able to have all this information about you. We track our sleep and exercise and movement all through Fitbits and all of the sleep apps and things like that. It makes no sense that we don't really take the time to internalize our sexual pleasure in the same way.
Do you have enough, that's a great point. Do you have enough data to determine yet or make a clear judgment that has worked for most people? Like caffeine works for most. If you get 7.5 or more hours of sleep, that seems to affect it for most people. Is there anything that you can make in terms of a statement that you've seen so far as an observation of the data, or is there enough data to show that yet?
So we have, I would say right now we're about over 50,000 like sessions that are kind of in our database. But we haven't, because like the way that people track it is, they would use unique tags. So like if I had a coffee one, I would tag it coffee, but everyone has very different tags. So the hope is actually with these research studies where people actually opt in. But we've actually done
isolate the data points at that and the variables to see.
Yeah. And actually we've done a couple partnerships with like THC companies like like ease and vape pens and things like that, just to see like, well, how about like, THC and sex, like how does that change? And so we've actually almost consistently seen that like THC in some form, whether it's, you're high on it or you use a THC lubricant, which doesn't actually mentally make you high, but it like helps kind of stimulate your nerves and around your vagina, and
Yes. It heightens the
all of that.
acuity through
It
which you feel those sensations.
Yeah, and so we've almost consistently seen like they've had longer orgasms through that. And if you're in a state that's legal, I would say like it's a great experiment to try. There's not a lot, but there's a good handful of weed THC lubricant companies that are out there that I think are pretty great. So yeah, it's
There
worth
you
trying if
go.
you're in a state that can do it.
And what about those that are listening that are like, "Ah, I'm a significant other, and if I let my partner use this, then they're not going to want to, have sex with me anymore. Or they're not going to want to, have a playful moment with me." How do you kind of challenge that stigma and let them feel like they're involved and that they're not being replaced by a robot, for example?
Yeah. So that's actually when I first started this company, like that was such a big feedback that we used to get all the time. It's like, oh, I can't get this for my significant other. And I was actually surprised, because to me it's like, if you can give your significant other a way to learn about their body and get more excited about, trying different things, I can't imagine why that's a negative thing. And I think also a lot of people do bring sex toys into like their bedroom to have different experiences. One of the cool things that we have actually is, because we have a smart vibrator, we're always able to update the firmware and the capabilities of what our vibrator can do. So one of the feedback is like, oh, I want to have more ways to interact with it with a partner. And so we actually put in a live view. So you can actually be using the vibrator, and then on the app, you can actually see that circle of like how they're relaxing, squeezing, and then also be able to change the motor directly on the app. And
Wow.
then
So
it'll change it in real time.
you're getting the feedback in real time, so you could change it in real time as you're watching.
Yeah.
Oh, this is
So
working. Keep doing that.
yes. So it's, to me, it's like, one, yes, it's a great soul thing. I love advocating as like a self-experiment tool, but also I think it's really great to bring in different partners and see what's like, just have fun with it. I think, not everyone's going to be comfortable with using sex toys, especially a rabbit style that's inserted. So, I'm not forcing anyone to do it. I think start with like bullet vibrators that are just for like clitoral stimulation or something. But yeah, I think anything that helps you kind of enhance your sex life or have ways to learn different things about your own body is like what I feel like it's a no-brainer in my opinion.
Amazing. I mean, it's a genius idea, and it's one of those companies where you're like, why didn't I think of that? Especially, I'm sure that the people that are in the industry were like, oh, that's genius. So, thinking about you and how you achieve success, what do you think is the single most important attribute that got you to where you are today?
Man, I think about this a lot, because I think in like when I speak at universities, they always say like, what advice would you give? And I like wonder what my best advice is, but I think one of them is, or I know one of them is, you just have to do it. I don't know. I'm always just like, a lot of people have hesitancies. I'm a big, I have imposter syndrome all the time of like, I don't know if I know how to do this, but I think at the end of the day, your willingness to do it is always beyond most people's capabilities of feeling like they're not capable. So I think putting yourself in that mentality of like, well, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And you crank on it. Like my background is very engineering, mechanical engineering, manufacturing engineering. But, when you're in a team of 5, you're doing, blog articles, you're doing SEO optimizations, you're doing finances and all of that. And it's learning all those things. I think you just have to have that hustle and just feeling like you're going to figure it out. And I think the other big thing, especially for, I think, college students, I always advocate is like, especially for STEM students, is like, take classes that are outside of STEM in like humanities and learning about the world, the history of the world, of philosophy, and like why the world works the way it works. I think I think we're missing so much of that. As I know, as a Berkeley Cal engineer, I was so like, I gotta, do well in my courses and I need to be able to succeed in this major. And I was like trying to take the easiest humanities courses, which I think is a huge regret because Cal has some of the best humanities courses out there. And, when you do, especially a startup, you're going to come into roads where it's a philosophical question. It's a moral question. It's a figuring out and you end up writing a lot too. So I think I would super advocate, take classes that are, I think, important to you. I think for me, I really wish I learned more history. I wish I focused more in history classes of why the world is the way it is now, because I think it helps you not feel as frustrated of feeling helpless. And I think especially during these times and with Black Lives Matter of I know I felt so helpless in understanding, I don't understand why this is the way it is, but we have to keep educating ourselves in the history and making sure that history doesn't repeat. And I think it's everyone's job, especially if you're going to do a startup, you have a big voice and platform. And so you need to figure out ways to use it well.
Yes, that's very valuable advice. And I wish everyone had to study psychology too, so you can understand. I mean, that's the one thing that's common amongst all of us. We all have to interact with other human beings. That should be, I think the arts and humanities are so important, and we've been so focused on STEM education. So I'm glad you said that. Coming from the STEM background, you said, wait a second, let's not forget about the arts and humanities, because we are human beings at the end of the day, and we need to interact and engage with each other, be more empathetic. And teaching empathy, I think, should be a requirement too. That's a whole nother conversation we could dive down. And I was just speaking with a organic chemist from Oxford. He's going to be on the podcast released soon, but he was talking about how he was a ballroom dancer, which is like the antithesis of organic chemistry. He's like, for me to survive organic chemistry, I needed to do ballroom dancing and get out of my comfort zone and do something that was completely dichotomous from organic chemistry. And that 100%. Sometimes helps you have that balance, that counterbalance.
That's the same way I feel about slacklining and surfing. I picked it up a few years ago, and I think a lot of yes, there's a lot of technicality to it and learning techniques. And for me, I'm such an engineering brain. I'm okay, but what is the proper way to do it? And why do you do it that way? What are the steps? But a lot of times people tell you it's about feeling. You just feel it, and you're I don't have feelings. I don't have time for feelings. And it's taking that time to just, go with the flow.
Just go with the flow. And thinking about the flow in your journey, what's on the opposite side? What's been your biggest lesson that you learned that maybe you wish you had learned sooner?
I think for me, I think it is just feeling, I say this now as I'm, in my very late 20s, and a lot of times it's feeling the imposter syndrome of feeling I don't actually okay, well, I was at Amazon doing mechanical engineering, but how many years was I doing it? Am I qualified for it? And especially as a startup, when you're giving yourselves titles and it's COO, CTO, VP of engineering, it's what does that all mean? Am I even qualified for that? And I think as long as you're continuing to learn, I think the biggest thing is just feeling confident of what you're doing. Just knowing that with the mission in mind, if you don't do it, who else is going to do it? And I think you just have to give yourself the confidence to just hustle, or at least fake it until you make it. I think that is such a very resonating thing that I didn't understand younger, when people are fake it till you make it. And I was no, that makes you a fake person. That's imposter. But I think a lot of time, I think that we all say as you get older, you just realize everyone's just trying to figure life out. And I think that's 1,000% true. I think a lot of times, the younger generation are always oh, how did you become a founder? That's such a brave thing. But I'm always listen, my GPA in college was horrible. I was not a good student. A lot of times I do very silly things all the time. And so it's just, I don't know, feeling
just believing in
confident in yourself. Yeah.
Believing in it reminds me of the 2005 commencement speech at Stanford from Steve Jobs. And he's just every day I would wake up for a while, and anytime I didn't feel like doing what I was going to do today and I said no, I knew it was time to change something. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that he would say to himself is, I realize that people aren't that much smarter than me. And I'm
Yeah.
actually capable of this stuff. And if I just believe in myself, even when other people don't believe in me, I
Yes.
can push through and persevere.
Yes, and I love telling myself like nobody cares about you in a good way of like freak out about all the little things you've done or like, oh, I made this huge mistake, but at the no one cares because everyone's always focused on themselves. I love telling that to myself because it's very relaxed. It's very soothing in a very weird way.
Yeah, it's liberating because you're like, oh yeah, this is just my life and my
Yes,
journey, and no one's going to be on the deathbed other than me at the end of my life. And I'm going to be the one deciding whether or not I lived it to my absolute max and
yeah,
fulfilled myself. Um, and I love that this is why entrepreneurial education is so important, because it gives you all these different facets of life that you're learning through a fire hose rather than these different phases. You kind of have to learn a lot all at once because you have to be all things to all people. Like you have to write the blog post, you have to do the technical stuff, you have to act as the CEO, you have to hand out titles, you have to manage a team. And
yes,
it's very rare to find that type of learning and education in another realm other than entrepreneurship. So I think the earlier you can learn entrepreneurship and be thrown into starting your own business or company, the better, because the more you're going to learn things that you might not learn till your adult life and later, and might not ever learn, and how
yeah,
to be empathetic and work with a team and collaborate and hustle. And
yes.
and speaking of hustle, I always love the scrappy entrepreneurial stories of the hustle along the way. What's something that you or your team did to hustle in a scrappy way early on that maybe you couldn't have revealed in the beginning, but you can reveal now?
Yeah, so we're still a pretty scrappy company. I think especially when we first started, it was hard to get funding. We like we struggled, especially as a hardware company. You need a lot of cash to build. I think I always laugh to think about how we started at the basements of UC Berkeley in their invention center. And we were 3D printing vibrators like all night. Like when people weren't using it, we were 3D printing vibrators. I mean, the lab tech were awesome and they knew, but then, sometimes students would come in and be like, what is this? Like, and so we did a lot of that. And I think the biggest thing is like at the time, so we had these like 3D printed vibrators with like wires sticking out with a battery connected and like trying just different prototyping methods. And it's like, well, who tries these? Like who has to use this? And so it's always the answer was us. So we've had to go through so many fascinating prototypes, I think, over the years. When we were first prototyping that were like 3D printed and like had wires that were leading out connected to a laptop. And then I would like build something and I'd be like, okay, I need you to try this, but don't move it this way, or like don't turn it this way, or else it's gonna like disconnect the entire like wires and all of that. So I always think that's like such a funny thing, or like when we needed our own data to see if, the way that it was measuring our data was correct, we like would put up like contests for anyone that was willing to participate within our team of like, okay, let's see like who can get the most data in a week. And like, we had like little game boards where you would put stickers for like how many times you masturbated that week with the Lioness prototype and all that. So
Talk about
we
healthy competition.
I know. And we vowed that we would never speak of again, but here I am telling you. So we've
That's
definitely done
amazing.
very scrappy things to make this all work.
It's a great idea, and it worked. And that goes back to like faking it until you make it. One of the other interviews I did, he claimed he was the number one volunteer company in the world, and they didn't even have any volunteers yet. And then they did become the number one volunteer company in the world by number of volunteers and projects around the world. And it's just unbelievable. Like sometimes you just have to believe in yourself that you are that version of yourself before you even get there.
Yeah. And I think that's something we learn as a company because we're all pretty like come from kind of like introverted backgrounds of we don't want to like I always joke like I wish we had like an amazing salesperson who was just like, this is the best vibrator. And we 100% believe it is, but we're always like, well, it's this like smart vibrator and like we built it, but we don't do enough, I think, to sell ourselves a lot of times. So that was a big learning curve that we had to do of like, there's no vibrator out there in the world that does what we do and like is continuing to expand on research the way we're going to do it. And so I think it's a lesson in ourselves of like constantly learning to advocate shamelessly about our product.
Yes. And when you're first, it helps because then you can make that claim and then everybody else that
Yes,
follows suit is just following your lead.
that's the hope.
All right, we're going to transition into something I call the under 30 seconds round, where I'm going to fire off a few questions, Anna, and answer with the first one that comes to mind. Are you ready?
Okay, let's go.
What is the book you've gifted more often than any other book, and why?
Oh, it's actually right behind me. It's the Toaster Project. It's a guy who, for a senior design project, built a toaster from scratch. Like he went to go mine the metals that he needed and he melted his own plastic to build a toaster from scratch. It's one in the engineering brain of me, super fascinating to even think about, but it also just in life to realize a $10 toaster you throw away, like what it actually took to build it. It's written in such a whimsical way and has lots of photos in it. I love it.
All right, we'll put that in the show notes. Thanks for the sharing. What's one of the best investments and one of the worst investments you've ever made, and why?
I think best investment, I'll say my therapist. I've had it on and off for years, but every time I do have one, I'm always like this, I'm so glad I'm doing this again. Because even if you don't feel like you have anything every week, it's just nice to talk to somebody about life. Worst investment, only because this is happening right now, is having a 2007 year car. I'm constantly having to fix things and like learning so much about cars just to fix all the little nuances about it. I would not have this old of a car anymore.
All right, well, audience, you heard it first. If you can help Anna out with a new car, incentivize her to level up to a Tesla, maybe we'll get her there. And I love the investment in therapists. It's so important. And even with coaching, I deal with this too. Is some people still think it's like a stigma of having to reach out to someone. And it's important to have someone you can talk to that doesn't have a conflict of interest or an inherent bias, that's solely invested in your health and your success without their own agenda.
100%.
What's the most impactful thing you do in your morning routine and the most impactful thing you do in your evening routine? And I kind of have a hint of where this might go.
Yeah, I feel like I know my impactful night is using, our own product, constantly testing, we find bugs. And so I always find that hilarious to like use it in that intentional way, but it's also a great, ending to a day. Impactful mornings. I feel like maybe kind of a silly one, but I make this like really weird green smoothie and I because I don't want to start my day with like sugars. It's literally just has like ginger, like a green powder, celery. From my garden, I like cut salad greens and I throw it in there, and then I put apple cider vinegar in it. No one drinks it in this house. Like everyone thinks it's really disgusting, but to me, like it feels like the right way to start
amazing.
My day.
I might have to take you up on that offer when I come visit your way.
You're gonna hate it, but I swear it's like, I don't know, it just makes me like feel good about the day.
Put your pep in your step.
Yes.
All right, pretend you won the Peter Thiel Fellowship and you were to get money to start a business instead of go to college. What's the very first thing you do to start your new business?
I mean, definitely still this business, I'm sure, but I actually would say like, I know that's like a glorified thing of, not going to college. For me, I will personally say like, I loved my time at Cal, and it wasn't because like, I think the program was amazing, but it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And to the point of like, I thought I was going to drop out because I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't think I was meant to be an engineer, but it just like forced me into this, like, I don't know, now anything that's stressful at work, I'm always like, well, like I survived, going weeks without sleeping at college. I feel like I can do this now. So it definitely taught me a level of like resilience that I think I would have never gotten. It really did make me grow up fast. So, but anyways, yeah, let me say I would still work in sex tech.
There you go. And last one, what's something you never knew you needed?
Oh, something I never knew I needed. Hmm. I don't know. I don't know what comes to mind.
The
I wanted to
lioness.
say, I feel like I want to say something funny, but I don't know. Actually, I can't think of anything. But yeah, I would say a lioness is truly, because I think a lot of people are like, I don't see why I need this data. But then we get amazing emails from, and we're not, people always think this is like for younger people, but actually one of our biggest demographics of purchasers are 50 plus. And so it's like giving yourself the opportunity to, one, feel confident that we built a good product, but also just learning about your body of like, just like how you orgasm, I think is like something you don't consciously think about when you masturbate. So I don't know. I'm a
Beautiful thing.
huge fan.
Well, Anna, thank you so much for your generosity too. What the audience doesn't know yet is Anna and her team were generous enough to offer anyone listening a coupon code. It's all caps, Phil20, and they get $20 off the Lioness vibrator. So thank you so much. I'm sure
Yes.
all those listening are going to want to dive in and give you some more data as well. So this is
I'm
an exciting
excited.
moment.
Yes, it's fully private secure. Mozilla Foundation has called us the IoT device to follow in terms of privacy standards. So please look it up if
Wow.
you're like worried or anything, because it's our data too. Like we use it all the time, so we wouldn't want that out in the world. So
Thank you,
yes, but
Anna.
happy to give you that discount. But thank you so much for having me. This was like a really fun conversation to have.
Thanks for being here. It was so much fun. Before you go, what is next for you? What's the next big goal, milestone, or bucket list item you want to achieve?
I would say for our company, the biggest thing we're working on is getting this research platform out. So it's going to actually roll out fairly soon on the apps where you can start opting into different research studies and things like that. So I'm really excited to, go into this new generation where we're having new research that we haven't had in many, many, many years or just never had. So
That's exciting.
I'm hoping to launch one of the biggest studies in the world about sexual function for females. So,
And you can
really
go to
excited.
lioness.io to find out more and also to get your vibrator. And
Yes.
where do listeners go to connect with you directly, Anna?
Yeah. So I will 100% say if you ping, I think it's help@Lioness or info@Lioness. It all goes into our team internally. I see all of them come through. If you're like, this is for Anna, I will read it. So please ping us or on our Instagram or all that. My co-founder runs that, so she always lets me know if someone's trying to reach out to me. So we're a small team, like it's really easy to find us.
We'll put those in the show notes as well. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. This is Anna Lee with Lioness, who takes care of your sexual health with the Lioness vibrator. We learned so much today: how to have difficult conversations with your parents, the morning pep to your step drink cocktail, if you're brave enough to try that out. How to change the stigma and how to take care of your sexual health. This was such a fun, informative episode. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you. It was awesome.
I hope this episode helped you as much as it helped me. Have an amazing day.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope this episode helped you as much as it helped me. Who do you think would benefit from hearing it? You can make an impact on their life by sharing it now. Before you go, I encourage you to tell us your favorite part of the episode in the review section. Now it's time to level up. Level up.